Okay, this is section 8.2, and we are going to learn how to graph secant and cosecant graphs. We're going to start with a basic secant graph, and then we're going to graduate to something with a lot of bells and whistles. To graph a secant graph, what we do is we realize that secant is very much related to cosine because they are the reciprocals of each other. So first, to graph a secant graph, I will graph a cosine graph. So to graph the cosine of x, I realize that the amplitude is 1 and then the value of b is 1. And so the period is 2 pi over 1 or 2 pi. And the spacing is 2 pi over 4 or pi over 2. So I will go through and I'll mark pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi, and so on. If we went negative, negative pi over 2, negative pi, negative 3 pi over 2, negative 2 pi, and so on. Okay, and then I'm going to say this is 1, and this is negative 1. And so my curve will start high. That's cosine. And then it'll go middle. It'll go low, and then it'll go middle, and then it'll go high. And then if I go backwards, it's going to look like this. And so I'm just going to dash in my cosine graph. So there's my cosine graph. Okay, we're familiar with that. Now we're going to transition my cosine graph to secant. So what you do to transition it is you realize that every max and min that you plotted is shared by the secant graph. Those are points on our secant graph. Now, what do we do with the rest of it? Where our cosine graph was crossing the x-axis, the x-intercepts, this is a place where a vertical asymptote is going to be. Because that's where the value of cosine was 0. And since secant is 1 over cosine, that's 1 over 0. That's where you're going to get a vertical asymptote. This is how you fill in the rest of your graph for secant. If it's up high, it continues high in between this asymptote. If it's low, it goes low in between the asymptotes. And of course, it would continue. I just decided to go between negative 2 pi and 2 pi. So I didn't really need all of this. Let's see, I guess I could do, what is the value of A for secant? It's the same value that it would be for cosine. You notice that that's not an amplitude. Secant has no amplitude. The period will be the same as it was for cosine. It's going to be 2 pi over B, or 2 pi over 1, or 2 pi. The spacing will be 2 pi over 4, or pi over 2, because that's the period divided by 4. There is no vertical shift. There is no phase shift. There is no reflection because this is positive. The range, what is the range? Well, for our secant graph, it's from negative infinity to this value, which is negative 1. And then it's empty, no space. And then up here, this is 1. So the range is from negative infinity to negative 1. And then 1 to infinity. What about the vertical asymptotes? They are occurring at x is equal to, in my graph, negative 3 pi over 2, negative pi over 2, pi over 2, and 3 pi over 2. That's where the vertical asymptotes occurred in this range of my graph. Okay, did I get 2 periods in? Let's see. Started here. That's 1 period. I started here. Yes, that's 2 periods. That's good.